Hey everyone, and welcome back to LGBT Stories. Have you ever experienced a moment that completely changed everything you thought you knew about your life? A moment so unexpected, so powerful, it throws all your carefully constructed boundaries out the window? That's exactly what happened to me. It started on a quiet, rainy evening and unfolded into a series of events that would redefine my relationship with my son forever. Get ready for a story about unexpected feelings, hidden truths, and a love that dared to break all the rules. I never knew I had gay feelings until my son, Ethan, and I shared a moment so unexpected and exciting that it blurred every boundary and led to the most unforgettable experience of my life. The house was quiet, save for the occasional creak of the wooden floorboards under my weight as I moved through the living room. It was one of those evenings when everything felt too still, the silence pressing down on me like a weight I couldn't escape. Outside, rain tapped against the window pane, a rhythmic reminder of the storm brewing both outside and, though I didn't realize it yet, within my life. Ethan, my son, had been living with me since returning home after college at 23. He carried himself with an air of independence that made it easy to forget how young he still was. Broad-shouldered, confident, and with a sharp wit that could disarm anyone. He often felt more like a roommate than my son. But tonight, he seemed different, quieter, more reserved. He was in the kitchen when I came home from work, his tall frame leaning casually against the counter as he scrolled through his phone. The sight of him was comforting in its familiarity, a reminder that despite everything, this was still home. "Long day?" he asked without looking up. "Always," I replied, tossing my keys onto the counter and opening the fridge. "What about you? Anything exciting happened today?" He shrugged, a non-committal gesture that had become his default lately. "Not really, just trying to figure some things out." I grabbed a soda and turned to face him, leaning against the opposite counter. "You've been saying that a lot lately. What's on your mind?" For a moment, he didn't answer, his fingers idly tapping the screen of his phone. Then he looked up, his dark eyes meeting mine with an intensity that made me pause. "Do you ever feel like you're stuck?" he asked, his voice quiet but steady. I frowned, caught off guard by the question. "Stuck? How?" "Like you're just going through the motions," he said, setting his phone down and crossing his arms. "Like no matter what you do, you can't escape the feeling that something's missing." His words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. I took a sip of my soda, buying myself a moment to think. "I think everyone feels that way at some point," I said finally. "It's normal to question things, especially at your age." He nodded, but his expression didn't change. If anything, he looked more conflicted. "What about you?" he asked, his gaze unwavering. "Do you ever feel that way?" The question caught me off guard, and I hesitated. Did I feel that way? The truth was, I hadn't allowed myself to think about it in a long time. Between work, bills, and keeping the house in order, there was little room for introspection. But Ethan's question lingered, stirring something inside me I wasn't ready to face. Sometimes, I admitted, setting the soda can down on the counter. But that's just part of life, isn't it? You learn to live with it. Ethan didn't respond immediately. Instead, he looked down at the floor, his jaw tight. "I don't know if I can." The honesty in his voice startled me, and I took a step closer. "Ethan, what's going on? Talk to me." For a moment, he seemed on the verge of saying something, his lips parting as if to speak, but then he shook his head, a small, almost imperceptible movement. "It's nothing. Forget I said anything." But I couldn't forget the look in his eyes, the way his shoulders slumped as he turned away. It stayed with me, a puzzle I couldn't piece together. Later that evening, after the rain had subsided and the house had settled into its usual nighttime rhythm, I found myself in the living room, a book in my lap that I wasn't really reading. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, the sound amplified by the quiet. Ethan walked in, his footsteps soft against the carpet. He hesitated in the doorway, as if unsure whether to enter. "Can't sleep?" I asked, looking up from the book. He shook his head, his hands shoved deep into the pockets of his sweatpants. "Nope, mine's too busy, I guess." I set the book aside and gestured for him to sit. "Come on, sit with me. Maybe talking will help." He hesitated for a moment before crossing the room and sinking into the armchair across from me. For a while, neither of us spoke, the silence between us filled only by the faint hum of the refrigerator in the kitchen. "You know you can talk to me about anything, right?" I said, finally breaking the silence. He nodded, but his eyes didn't meet mine. "I know. Then what's going on?" I pressed gently. "You've been off lately. Is it something I did?" That got his attention. He looked up sharply, shaking his head. "No, it's not you. It's just complicated. Life usually is," I said with a small smile, trying to ease the tension, "but you don't have to go through it alone." He took a deep breath, his chest rising and falling as he seemed to wrestle with whatever was on his mind. Finally, he leaned forward, his elbows resting on his knees, his hands clasped tightly together. "Dad," he said, his voice barely above a whisper, "there's something I need to tell you." I straightened in my seat, my heart suddenly pounding. "Okay, I'm listening." He looked up at me, and for the first time, I saw something in his eyes that I couldn't quite place, a mixture of fear and vulnerability, but also determination. "I've been holding this in for a long time," he said, his voice steady despite the tension in his posture, "and I can't do it anymore. I need you to know." My mind raced, 1,000 possibilities flashing through my head. What could he possibly be about to say? Was he in trouble? Was he sick? "I'm gay," he said, the words tumbling out in a rush. As if he were afraid he wouldn't be able to say them if he paused. The room seemed to go still, the air heavy with the weight of his confession. For a moment, I couldn't speak, couldn't think. I could only stare at him, the words echoing in my mind. "I'm gay," he repeated, his voice quieter this time. "And I'm sorry I didn't tell you sooner. I didn't know how you'd react." I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came out, not because I was angry or disappointed. I wasn't, but because I realized in that moment just how much he had been carrying on his own, the fear, the uncertainty, the weight of hiding this part of himself. It all hit me like a punch to the gut. "Ethan," I said finally, my voice shaky but firm, "you don't have to apologize for who you are, ever." His eyes widened, a flicker of hope breaking through the fear. "You're okay with it." "Okay with it," I repeated, standing and crossing the room to kneel in front of him. I placed a hand on his shoulder, looking him straight in the eyes. "Ethan, you're my son. I love you. Nothing will ever change that." For a moment, he just stared at me, his expression unreadable. Then, to my surprise, he let out a shaky laugh, his shoulders relaxing as if a massive weight had been lifted. "Thank you," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "I was so scared. I didn't know what you'd say." "I'm sorry you ever felt that way," I said, my own voice thick with emotion. "You should never have to be afraid to be honest with me." We sat there for a while, the silence between us no longer heavy, but comforting. The storm outside had passed, leaving the world quiet and still, and for the first time in a long time, I felt like we were truly connected, not just as father and son, but as two people who had finally found the courage to be honest with each other. But as much as I wanted to believe that this was the end of the story, deep down I knew it wasn't. This was only the beginning, because while Ethan's confession had brought us closer, it had also opened a door to something I wasn't ready to face. Something that would test the boundaries of our relationship in ways I could never have imagined. And the story didn't end there. Not even close. The days following Ethan's confession were a strange mix of normalcy and quiet tension. We fell back into our usual routines, me at work, Ethan tinkering with job applications or scrolling on his laptop, but there was a subtle shift between us. It wasn't something I could put my finger on exactly. It was in the way he looked at me during breakfast, or how he lingered in the kitchen a little longer than usual when we spoke. For my part, I tried to act like everything was the same, but it wasn't. Ethan's admission had stirred something inside me, something I wasn't ready to name. His vulnerability that night, the courage it took for him to lay his truth bare. It had left an impression that lingered long after the moment passed. One evening about a week later, I found myself standing in the living room, staring out the window. The sky was painted in hues of orange and pink, the last rays of the setting sun casting long shadows across the floor. Ethan walked in, his footsteps soft on the carpet. "Hey," he said, his voice breaking the silence. "Hey," I replied, glancing back at him. "How was your day?" He shrugged, moving to sit on the couch. "Same as always, still waiting to hear back from that internship." "You'll get it," I said, turning to face him. "You're smart, capable, and you know how to sell yourself. They'd be lucky to have you." He looked up at me, a small smile playing on his lips. "Thanks, Dad, that means a lot." I sat down across from him, the coffee table between us. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then he leaned back, stretching his legs out in front of him. "Can I ask you something?" he said, his tone casual but his expression serious. "Of course," I said, folding my hands in my lap. "What was it like for you?" he asked, "when you were my age. I mean, did you feel lost?" The question caught me off guard, and I had to think for a moment before answering. "I guess I did in some ways," I said slowly. "I didn't have everything figured out, that's for sure, but back then it was different. You didn't have as many options, and you didn't have as much time to figure things out. You just did what you had to do." Ethan nodded, his gaze thoughtful. "Do you think you made the right choices?" The weight of his question settled over me, and for a moment, I wasn't sure how to answer. I said finally, that I did what I thought was best at the time. Whether it was the right choice or not, I don't know, but I don't regret it." He studied me for a moment, his dark eyes searching mine. "Do you ever wish you could go back, change things?" His words sent a jolt through me, though I wasn't sure why. "What's this really about, Ethan?" I asked, my voice gentle. He hesitated, his fingers tapping against the armrest. "It's just, I feel like I'm at a crossroads, you know? Like no matter what I choose, I'll always wonder if I made the wrong decision." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. "That's life, kid," I said. "There's no way to know if you're making the right choice until you've already made it. All you can do is follow your gut and hope for the best." Ethan nodded, his gaze dropping to the floor. "Yeah, I guess you're right." But there was something in his voice, something in the way he avoided my eyes that told me there was more he wasn't saying. That night, as I lay in bed, I couldn't stop thinking about our conversation. There was a vulnerability in Ethan that I hadn't seen before, a side of him that reminded me of how fragile he still was despite the confident facade he wore. I wanted to protect him, to help him find his way, but I wasn't sure how. The next morning I woke early, the house still quiet in the gray light of dawn. I made myself a cup of coffee and sat at the kitchen table, staring out at the backyard as the world slowly came to life. I didn't hear Ethan coming in until he spoke. Couldn't sleep. I turned to see him standing in the doorway, his hair mussed from sleep, a hoodie hanging loosely from his broad shoulders. "Something like that," I said, gesturing for him to join me. He poured himself a cup of coffee and sat down across from me, his movements slow and deliberate. For a while, neither of us spoke. "Dad," he said suddenly, breaking the silence. "Can I tell you something? Something I've never told anyone." His words sent a shiver down my spine. "Of course," I said, keeping my tone steady. He took a deep breath, his hands wrapped tightly around his mug. "I've been scared my whole life. Scared that if people knew who I really was, they'd hate me, that they'd think I was wrong." I felt my heart ache at the pain in his voice. "Ethan, you're not wrong, you're you. And anyone who can't see how amazing you are doesn't deserve to be in your life." He looked up at me, his eyes shining with unshed tears. "But what if I don't even know who I am? What if I'm still figuring it out?" "Then that's okay," I said. "You don't have to have all the answers right now. You just have to be honest with yourself." For a moment, he didn't respond. Then he nodded, his gaze dropping to his mug. "Thanks, Dad, that means a lot." The days passed, and though Ethan seemed lighter, there was still an unspoken tension between us. It wasn't bad exactly, but it was there, a subtle undercurrent that neither of us addressed. One evening as I was cleaning up after dinner, Ethan walked into the kitchen, his expression unreadable. "Need help?" he asked, grabbing a towel. "Sure," I said, handing him a plate to dry. For a while, we worked in silence, the clinking of dishes the only sound in the room. Then he spoke. "Do you ever feel lonely?" I paused, the dish in my hand forgotten. "Sometimes," I admitted. "Why?" "I don't know," he said, his voice quiet. I guess I've just been thinking a lot about what it means to be connected, to really feel like you're a part of something. I set the dish down and turned to face him. Ethan, are you okay? You've been asking a lot of heavy questions lately. He hesitated, his gaze flicking to the floor. I'm fine. I want you to know how much you mean to me, how much I appreciate everything you've done for me. His words took me by surprise, and for a moment, I wasn't sure how to respond. You mean everything to me too, Ethan, I said finally. The way he looked at me then, his eyes filled with a mixture of gratitude, longing, and something I couldn't quite place, made my chest tighten. Thanks, Dad, he said, his voice barely above a whisper, but as he turned and left the room, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was more to his words than he was letting on. The weeks after Ethan's late-night confession brought a strange closeness between us. We spoke more often, not just in passing, but deeply, honestly. He opened up about his struggles, how he'd felt like he had to hide himself, how he was still learning to accept who he was. I listened, offering what advice I could, but more often than not, just being there for him was enough. But it wasn't just Ethan who was changing. I could feel something shifting inside me too. His vulnerability made me reflect on parts of myself I had long ignored, emotions and desires I had buried beneath years of routine and responsibility. I told myself it was just my protective instincts kicking in, a father wanting to support his son, but deep down I knew it was more complicated than that. One evening, Ethan asked if we could watch a movie together. It was something we hadn't done in years, not since he was a teenager. I agreed, happy for the chance to spend more time with him. We settled on the couch, a blanket draped over both of us as the opening credits rolled. The movie was a forgettable romantic comedy, the kind you watch more for the company than the story. But as the characters navigated their tangled relationships, I couldn't help but glance at Ethan. His profile was illuminated by the flickering light of the screen, his features sharp yet soft in the dim glow. He caught me looking and smiled. "What?" he asked, his tone playful. "Nothing," I said quickly, turning back to the screen, but I could feel his gaze lingering on me. And for the rest of the movie, I found it impossible to focus. When the credits finally rolled, I stood up, stretching to hide my nervousness. "I'll clean up," I said, gesturing to the empty popcorn bowl and soda cans. "I've got it," Ethan said, standing as well. "You relax." I hesitated, but his tone left no room for argument. I watched as he carried the dishes to the kitchen, his movements easy and confident. For a moment, I stayed rooted to the spot, unsure of what to do with myself. Then on impulse, I followed him into the kitchen. Ethan was rinsing the bowl, his back to me. I leaned against the doorway, crossing my arms. "You've grown up a lot, I said, the words slipping out before I could stop them. He glanced over his shoulder, a smirk playing on his lips. "Is that your way of saying I'm not a kid anymore?" I shrugged. "Maybe." He set the bowl down and turned to face me, his expression suddenly serious. "I've been thinking a lot about what you said about following your gut." I prompted, my heart picking up speed. "And I think I've been too afraid to do that," he admitted. "I've spent so much time worrying about what other people think about what's right or wrong, that I've ignored what I really want." His words hit me harder than I expected. "Ethan, it's not easy to follow your gut. Sometimes it means taking risks, stepping into the unknown." He stepped closer, his dark eyes searching mine. "What about you? Do you follow your gut?" I opened my mouth to answer, but the intensity of his gaze stole the words from me. The air between us felt charged, heavy with something unspoken. I took a step back, but Ethan closed the distance. "Ethan," I said, my voice barely above a whisper, "what are you doing?" "What I should have done a long time ago," he said softly. Before I could respond, he reached out, his fingers brushing against my hand. The contact sent a jolt through me, and I froze, torn between pulling away and leaning into him. "Ethan, this isn't," I started, but my voice faltered as he stepped even closer. "Why not?" he asked, his tone gentle but insistent. "Why can't it be?" "Because it's not," I trailed off, unable to finish the sentence. My mind was screaming at me to stop, to walk away, but my body refused to move. Ethan's hand moved to my cheek, his touch warm and steady. "Tell me you don't feel it," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I closed my eyes, my heart pounding in my chest. "This is wrong," I said, but the words fell hollow, like I was trying to convince myself more than him. "Does it feel wrong?" he pressed. I couldn't answer. The truth was it didn't. It felt terrifying, exhilarating, and completely forbidden, but it didn't feel wrong. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying the moment in the kitchen over and over. I had pulled away before anything could happen, but the tension between us had been undeniable, and now I didn't know what to do. The next morning, Ethan acted as if nothing had happened. He was his usual self, casual, confident, even playful, but I couldn't shake the memory of his touch. The way his voice had trembled when he asked if I felt it too. As the days passed, I found myself avoiding him, retreating to my room or leaving the house whenever I could. But no matter how much distance I put between us, I couldn't escape the pull I felt whenever we were in the same room. Then one evening, everything came to a head. I was in the garage, tinkering with an old lawnmower that hadn't worked in years. It was an excuse to keep my hands busy, to distract myself from the thoughts swirling in my head. I didn't hear Ethan come in until he spoke. "Are you avoiding me?" he asked, his voice cutting through the quiet. I straightened, wiping my hands on a rag. "Of course not. Why would I be avoiding you?" He stepped closer, his gaze unwavering. "You tell me." I sighed, setting the rag down. "Ethan, I'm just trying to figure some things out." "Like what?" he pressed. "Why do you keep pushing me away?" His words made my chest tighten. "Ethan, whatever this is, it can't happen." "Why not?" he demanded, his voice rising. "Because you're scared. Because it's easier to pretend you don't feel the same way." I turned to face him, my hands clenched at my sides. "Ethan, I'm your father. This isn't just about you or me. It's about everything. Our family, our lives, this would destroy everything." "But what if it didn't?" he asked, his tone softening. "What if it made things better?" I shook my head, my throat tight. "You don't understand. This isn't something we can just do. It's not that simple." "Nothing about this is simple," he said, stepping closer. "But that doesn't mean it's not real." I looked away, unable to meet his gaze. "Ethan, please don't make this harder than it already is." "I'm not trying to make it harder," he said, his voice trembling. "I'm trying to tell you that I care about you more than I've ever cared about anyone." His words broke something inside me, and I felt tears sting my eyes. "Ethan, you don't know what you're saying." "Yes, I do," he insisted. "I've never been more sure of anything in my life." I closed my eyes, the weight of his words pressing down on me. "This can't happen," I said, my voice barely audible. But even as I said the words, I knew I didn't believe them. The garage felt suffocating, the silence between us thicker than the summer heat hanging in the air. Ethan stood in front of me, his face a mixture of defiance and vulnerability. His words from moments earlier echoed in my mind. I've never been more sure of anything in my life. The weight of it all pressed down on me. The enormity of what he was saying and what it meant for both of us. "This has to stop, Ethan," I said finally, my voice breaking. "We can't." "Why?" he interrupted, his tone sharp but not angry. "Why do we have to stop? Because of what people would think? Because it's wrong? Who decides what's wrong, Dad?" I couldn't meet his gaze. "It doesn't matter what anyone else thinks. This is about us. About what's right for you, for me, for everything we've built." "And who decides that?" he pressed, stepping closer. "You? Society? Because if you're being honest, you'd admit that what's happening here feels more real than anything else in your life." His words hit me like a hammer. He wasn't wrong, and that terrified me. "Ethan, you're my son," I said, grasping for solid ground. "That doesn't change, no matter what." "And what if that's not the only thing we are?" he asked, his voice dropping to a whisper. The air between us was electric, charged with an intensity one could no longer ignore. I wanted to deny it, to push him away and pretend none of this was happening. But the truth was undeniable. Something had shifted between us, and there was no going back to the way things were. "Ethan, please," I said, my voice trembling. "This isn't just about us. There are lines we can't cross." "But we already have," he said, cutting me off. "You feel it, don't you? The way things have changed, the way we've changed." I turned away, unable to face him, my heart was pounding in my chest. My thoughts a chaotic swirl of guilt, fear, and something I couldn't name. "I can't do this," I whispered. He stepped closer, his hand brushing against my arm. The touch sent a jolt through me, and I pulled away instinctively, but not before I saw the hurt in his eyes. "I'm not trying to hurt you," he said softly. I need you to know how I feel. I can't keep pretending this isn't real." I turned back to him, my chest tight. "Ethan, this isn't just about feelings. It's about consequences, about what this would mean for both of us." "I don't care about the consequences," he said, his voice steady. "I care about you, about us." The next few days passed in a blur. I threw myself into work, into chores, into anything that could distract me from the turmoil inside me. But no matter how much I tried to distance myself, Ethan was always there. His presence in the house, a constant reminder of the line we were towing. One night, I came home late, hoping to avoid him. The house was quiet, the only light coming from the living room. I thought he was asleep until I saw him sitting on the couch, a glass of whiskey in his hand. "You're late," he said, his voice calm but tinged with something I couldn't place. "Long day," I said, loosening my tie and setting my bag down. "You should be in bed." "So should you," he said, taking a sip of his drink. I hesitated, unsure whether to join him or retreat upstairs. But something in his expression stopped me, a vulnerability that made my chest ache. Against my better judgment, I sat down in the armchair across from him. "Everything okay?" I asked, keeping my tone neutral. He shrugged, swirling the amber liquid in his glass. "Just thinking about." He looked up at me, his gaze piercing, about how hard it is to be honest with yourself, to stop hiding from what you really want. His words hung in the air, heavy with meaning. I felt my stomach twist, but I forced myself to hold his gaze. "Ethan, you don't have to say it," he said, cutting me off. "I know you feel it too. I see it every time you look at me." I opened my mouth to respond, but no words came out. He was right. I couldn't deny it any longer, not to him, not to myself. The connection between us, the pull that had been growing stronger with each passing day, was undeniable. "This can't happen," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. "But it already is," he said, leaning forward. "You can't pretend this isn't real, Dad. I know you feel it." I stood abruptly, my heart pounding in my chest. "I need to go to bed." "Don't run away from this," he said, standing as well. "Don't run away from me." I turned to face him, my hands clenched at my sides. "Ethan, this isn't just about what we feel. It's about what's right." "And what if this is right?" he asked, his voice steady. "What if this is the only thing that makes sense?" I stared at him, my mind racing. The room felt too small, the air too thick. I needed space, needed time to think. Without another word, I turned and walked upstairs, leaving him standing alone in the living room. The next day, I was in the kitchen preparing something to eat for both of us when Ethan came in, and without saying a single word, we started kissing. All I knew was that in that moment, nothing else mattered. The world outside the kitchen disappeared, leaving only us, and as he leaned in, his lips brushing against mine, I knew there was no turning back. The kiss was soft at first, tentative, as if we were both testing the waters, but it quickly deepened, the emotions we had been holding back for so long finally breaking free. I felt his hands on my shoulders, pulling me closer, and for the first time in what felt like forever, I let myself go. When we finally broke apart, our breaths ragged, I stared at him, my mind racing. "Ethan, what are we doing? Wow, what a story." It's raw, it's real, and it definitely makes you think, right? Let me know your thoughts in the comments below. Have you ever faced a situation where love challenged your expectations? Share your experiences, and let's create a safe space for open conversation. If you enjoyed this emotional journey, please hit that like button. And don't forget to subscribe to LGBT Stories for more captivating and heartfelt tales just like this one. Also, comment below, what did you think of the dad's reaction? Thanks for watching.